The day you stop needing everyone's approval is the day you finally discover who was never really on your side. That sounds harsh, but life has a way of teaching certain lessons late. Very late. When you're young, you expect betrayal from enemies. What catches you off guard is discovering that some of the deepest disappointments come from people you once trusted, people you laughed with, people you helped, people whose calls you answered when nobody else did. I remember the first time someone sat me down and said, "You know what they're saying about you when you're not around, right?" At first, I laughed. I genuinely thought it was a misunderstanding. Then I heard the details, the specific comments, the private jokes, the opinions that had apparently been circulating for months while I continued treating those same people with respect. What shocked me wasn't what they said. What shocked me was how normal they acted whenever they saw me. That's the part nobody prepares you for. Most people imagine betrayal as some dramatic confrontation. Real life is quieter than that. People smile. They shake your hand. They ask about your family. And then they tell a completely different story the moment you leave the room. Look, this happened to me personally, which is why I'm telling you this. Your experience might be totally different, so there's no ground for an argument here. I'm simply describing what I learned. What hurt wasn't the gossip itself. It was the realization that I had unknowingly built emotional investments in people who never valued me the way I valued them. The older you get, the more painful that realization becomes. Not because you're weak, because time becomes precious. When you're 20, wasted relationships feel recoverable. When you're 40, 50, or beyond, you begin to understand the true cost of misplaced trust. You start asking difficult questions. How many years did I spend trying to impress people who never respected me? How much energy did I waste worrying about opinions that were never going to change? Why did I need their validation in the first place? That last question changed everything for me, because eventually I realized that the pain wasn't only coming from what people were saying. Part of it was coming from my own need to be liked, my own desire to be accepted, my own expectation that loyalty would always be returned with loyalty. Life doesn't always work that way. Some people appreciate you. Some people tolerate you. Some people secretly compete with you. And some people simply enjoy discussing other people's lives because they haven't built enough of their own. But something even stranger started to bother me. Not the people talking behind my back. The person who rushed to tell me about it. Because when I looked closely, I began noticing a hidden dynamic that most people completely miss. And that opens up a much darker psychological trap, which I'll reveal in a bit. It took me years to realize something that now seems painfully obvious. The person bringing you the gossip isn't always protecting you. Sometimes they're feeding on your reaction. Think about it. If someone truly wanted to protect your peace, why would they carry every ugly opinion straight to your heart? That question changed the way I looked at people. For years, I believed the messenger was being honest. I thought they cared about me enough to tell me the truth. But after watching the same pattern repeat itself with different people, I noticed something strange. The messenger rarely brought solutions. They only brought poison. They never said, "I defended you." They never said, "I told them to stop." Instead, they arrived with another story, another rumor, another reason for me to lose sleep. And every time I listened, I walked away carrying a burden that wasn't mine. Eventually, I started asking myself a difficult question. Who benefits from me knowing this? Not me. I became distracted. I became suspicious. I started looking at innocent conversations through the lens of betrayal. I questioned people who had done nothing wrong. My peace disappeared. Meanwhile, the messenger always seemed satisfied, almost entertained. That's when I realized some people don't spread gossip because they enjoy information. They spread it because they enjoy emotion. Your anger, your disappointment, your confusion. Those emotions make them feel important. For a few minutes, they become the center of your attention. Age teaches you to recognize this pattern. Not everyone who gives you information is giving you wisdom. Some people simply deliver emotional chaos wrapped in the disguise of honesty. That doesn't mean every messenger has bad intentions. Some genuinely care. Some truly believe you deserve to know. But wisdom comes from asking another question. What do I gain by carrying this? If the answer is nothing except anxiety, resentment, and endless overthinking, maybe the information wasn't worth receiving. These days I've learned to set quiet boundaries. If someone begins a conversation with, "You know what they're saying about you, ... I usually stop them, not because I'm afraid, because I've learned that protecting my peace is more valuable than satisfying my curiosity. People can have opinions. They always will. I don't need a daily report about them. Something interesting happened after I adopted that mindset. The messenger slowly disappeared, not because the gossip stopped, because they realized they could no longer use it to control my emotions. That lesson was powerful, but it also forced me to ask an even deeper question. Why did those stories affect me so much in the first place? Why was I so desperate to know what everyone thought about me? The answer wasn't in adulthood. It was hiding much further back, somewhere in childhood, where many of us quietly learned that being accepted felt like survival. And we'll discuss how that early conditioning still controls millions of adults today in the next section. I used to think I had a gossip problem. The truth was I had an approval problem. That realization didn't happen overnight. It happened after years of asking myself why one careless comment from another person could stay in my mind for days. Why did it matter so much? Why couldn't I simply let it go? Then I started looking backward instead of forward. Most of us weren't taught how to think independently. We were taught how to fit in. As children, being accepted wasn't just a nice feeling. It felt like survival. We wanted our parents' approval, our teachers' approval, our classmates' approval. We learned very early that being liked often meant being safe. Being excluded felt painful. Our brains remembered that lesson. The strange thing is, our childhood ends. But those patterns don't. Many adults are still trying to win approval from people who don't even think about them. I know I was. Every criticism felt personal. Every rumor felt like an attack on my identity. Not because I was weak, because a younger version of me was still trying to avoid rejection. That's what gossip does. It doesn't attack your present. It wakes up your past. Suddenly you're no longer a mature adult. You're the child wondering why someone doesn't like you. You're the teenager trying to fit into a group that never truly accepted you. And without realizing it, you begin making decisions just to avoid that uncomfortable feeling. You explain yourself too much. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You become careful around people who don't deserve that much space in your mind. I lived like that for years. Looking back, I wasn't protecting my reputation. I was protecting an old wound. The problem is that old wounds quietly become daily habits. You overthink simple conversations. You replay yesterday's arguments. You imagine future confrontations that may never happen. Your body is sitting in the present. Your mind is trapped in imaginary courtrooms, trying to defend itself. Nobody warns you how exhausting that becomes. One careless comment from someone else can steal an entire afternoon. One rumor can follow you home. It sits with you during dinner. It follows you into bed. It even greets you the next morning. Not because the words were powerful, because your mind keeps replaying them. That's when I realized something. People weren't taking away my peace. I was handing it over. And every minute I spent thinking about people who didn't value me was a minute I couldn't invest in my own family, my own work, or my own future. That invisible cost became impossible to ignore, because the damage wasn't only emotional anymore. It was affecting my energy, my focus, and even the way I lived each day. We'll talk about that hidden price next, because it's far greater than most people ever realize. The biggest damage gossip ever did to me wasn't emotional. It was practical. I didn't notice it at first. Nobody does. You think you're just upset for a few hours. You think tomorrow will be different. Then one day you realize you've been carrying the same conversation in your head for weeks. I remember sitting at work, staring at a screen without reading a single sentence. My body was there. My mind wasn't. It was replaying words that had already been spoken, imagining conversations that would probably never happen, writing imaginary speeches to people who weren't even thinking about me anymore. That's when I understood something important. The brain doesn't care whether a battle is real or imagined. If your mind believes it's under attack, it spends energy preparing for a fight. That energy has to come from somewhere. It comes from your focus, your creativity, your patience, your peace. Slowly, I became mentally exhausted without doing any real work. I wasn't carrying heavy boxes. I was carrying invisible arguments. Then I started noticing another cost. When I came home, I wasn't really home. My family was talking. I was nodding. But inside, I was somewhere else, still trying to understand why someone had said what they said, still trying to defend myself in conversations that only existed in my imagination. The people who loved me were getting whatever energy I had left after strangers had already drained it. That realization hurt, because they had done nothing wrong, yet they were paying the price for battles they never started. This is purely my personal experience and observation. If your situation turned out differently, I'd genuinely love to know your perspective in the comments. Maybe your experience has been different, but for me, the greatest loss wasn't my reputation. It was my attention. Attention is life. Whatever owns your attention eventually owns your days. And whatever owns your days slowly shapes your future. That's why I became protective of my mind. Not my image, my mind. People will always have opinions. You cannot control that, but you can decide whether those opinions are allowed to rent space inside your head. The day I understood that my daily routine started changing, I slept better. I became more present. I laughed more, not because people had stopped talking, because I had finally stopped listening. That wasn't weakness. It was discipline. And discipline creates a kind of freedom that arguments never can. Still, there was one lesson left to learn. The lesson that completely changed the balance of power. It wasn't about proving people wrong. It wasn't about exposing anyone. It was about discovering why silence can become the strongest response you'll ever make. We'll get to that next, because that's where everything finally began to change. The biggest mistake I ever made was trying to defend my reputation. I thought if I explained myself well enough, people would finally understand me. They didn't. In fact, the more I defended myself, the more attention the gossip received. That was a painful lesson. Some battles don't grow because they're important. They grow because we keep feeding them. I used to believe silence meant weakness. Now I see it differently. Silence is often a sign that you've stopped asking strangers to decide your worth. That doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. It means you become selective. You stop responding to every opinion. You stop correcting every misunderstanding. You stop chasing every person who refuses to see the truth. Age changes the way you think. When I was younger, I wanted everyone to like me. Now I simply want peace. And those are two very different goals. Here's what experience taught me. People who enjoy talking about you are usually waiting for one thing: a reaction. They want to know they reached you. They want to know they disturbed your peace. The moment they realize you're no longer playing that game, something interesting happens. Many of them lose interest, not because they've become better people, because there's no reward anymore. Think about a fire. It doesn't matter how large it is. Without fuel, it slowly dies. Gossip works the same way. Every emotional reaction is another piece of wood. Every public argument is fresh oxygen. Every desperate explanation keeps the flames alive. So I made a decision. I would spend my energy building my life instead of defending it. Was it easy? Not at all. There were days I wanted to respond. Days I wanted to prove people wrong. Days I wanted everyone to hear my side of the story. But then I asked myself one question. If someone has already decided who I am, would another explanation really change their mind? Most of the time, the answer was no. That question saved me countless hours of frustration. Instead of reacting, I started investing in myself. I read more. I exercised more. I spent more time with people who brought peace instead of drama. Little by little, I noticed something remarkable. The less I chased respect, the more naturally it came. Not from everyone, but from the people who actually mattered. Looking back, I realized my greatest victory wasn't changing other people's opinions. It was reaching a place where those opinions no longer controlled my emotions. That's real freedom. And once you experience that freedom, there's one final lesson that becomes impossible to ignore. It's the routine that protects your peace every single day, not just from gossip, but from every unnecessary burden life tries to place on your shoulders. That's the lesson that finally gave me the quiet life I'd been searching for. and it's where this story comes full circle. If I could go back and give my younger self one piece of advice, it wouldn't be about making more money. It wouldn't be about choosing different friends. It would be much simpler. Protect your peace before you protect your reputation. For years, I believed my happiness depended on what people thought about me. Now I know it depends on what I allow to live inside my mind. That realization didn't happen in a single day. It became a daily routine. Every morning, I remind myself that I cannot control another person's opinion. I can only control my response. That one thought has saved me from countless unnecessary battles. I also became more careful about who I spend my time with. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your life. Some people leave every conversation lighter. Others leave every conversation heavier. Pay attention to how you feel after spending time with someone. Your emotions often reveal the truth long before your mind is willing to admit it. I also stopped explaining myself to people who had already made up their minds. Experience has taught me that those who genuinely want to understand you will ask questions. Those who want to judge you will ignore every answer. There's a huge difference. One deserves your time. The other doesn't deserve your energy. The strange thing is, once I stopped chasing approval, my relationships actually became healthier. The people who truly cared stayed. The people who only enjoyed drama slowly disappeared. I didn't have to force anyone out of my life. Peace did that for me. Looking back, every lesson in this journey connects. The gossip wasn't my biggest problem. My need for approval was. The messenger wasn't always my protector. Sometimes they were feeding my anxiety. My childhood had quietly trained me to fear rejection. That fear followed me into adulthood. Then I discovered the hidden cost. Not just emotional pain, but lost focus, lost time, and lost peace. Finally, I learned that silence isn't surrender. It's self-respect. It's choosing not to hand your emotional well-being to people who haven't earned it. If you're over 40, you've probably learned at least one painful lesson about people. Maybe someone betrayed your trust. Maybe someone smiled to your face and criticized you behind your back. Or maybe you've already reached the point where none of that matters anymore. Whatever your story is, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Not because we're looking for sympathy, because wisdom grows when people share the lessons life charged them to learn. So let me ask you one final question. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned about people talking behind your back? Share it in the comments. Your experience might become the exact advice that someone else has been waiting to hear for years. And sometimes that's how real healing begins.